This episode is brought to you by Young Sidekick, an innovative, secure, and 100% HIPAA compliant AI solution designed for therapists. It cuts the time spent on progress notes by 10x, helping you stay more present during sessions while providing insightful analytics to elevate the quality of care. And you can get an exclusive 20% off your first purchase with promo code LISA20 at checkout at youngsidekick.com. That's young, Y-U-N-G sidekick.com, or just click the link in the show notes. Welcome to the Therapy Show. I'm Lisa Mustard, your host and guide on this journey of learning and professional growth. Here, we transform the way you earn continuing education contact hours. Whether you're on a walk, on a break in between sessions, commuting, or even preparing dinner, you can engage with cutting-edge insights from leading subject matter experts. Each episode features conversations with seasoned professionals who share effective techniques and tools tailored for busy therapists like you. Our goal is to enrich your practice and fit seamlessly into your active life, ensuring you stay informed and inspired without the hassle of traditional methods. You can say goodbye to sitting in front of a computer screen watching hours and hours of recorded trainings. Instead, we make continuing education as easy and accessible as your favorite podcast. So make sure to visit the website, lisamustard.com, to sign up for our continuing education membership. It's a fantastic way to earn your credits while enjoying the podcast. Join us on the Therapy Show, where your professional development continues wherever you are. Hey, everyone. I am thrilled to bring you this encore episode of the Therapy Show. And given the current climate of division that we often see in our country, I thought it was a perfect time to revisit this important conversation. In this episode, which is a pod course, Dr. Seth Scott, a professor at Columbia International University, joins me to dive deep into how we as counselors can navigate differences in values and beliefs with our clients. This episode offers valuable insights and practical tools to help therapists better understand their own values, avoid imposing them on their clients, and foster meaningful growth and connection, even when perspectives differ. It's a powerful conversation that feels more timely than ever, and I'm excited to share it with you again. Once again, it is a pod course, so you can earn one continuing education contact hour. Just click the link in the show notes to learn more. But before we get into the pod course, I wanted to share with you a new course that my friend Kim Tolson has put together. Are you a therapist looking to live abroad but unsure how to maintain your practice while embracing a new life overseas? Well, it's time to turn that dream into a reality with Unlock Your New Life Abroad, the complete guide for those ready to leave the U.S. by Kim Tolson. This comprehensive course is packed with everything you need to make a seamless transition, no matter your destination. You'll get expert advice on navigating complex visa requirements and financial planning, ensuring you set yourself up for success. Plus, the course dives deep into telehealth regulations across borders, making sure you can ethically and legally serve clients no matter where you are in the world. And it's not just about logistics. Unlock Your New Life Abroad also provides strategies to build a supportive expat community so you don't have to go it alone. Imagine the peace, freedom, and stability of living your best life while continuing to make a meaningful impact as a therapist. If you've ever dreamed of breaking free from the daily grind and exploring the world, this course will be your ultimate roadmap to living and working abroad with confidence. So don't wait. Embark on this life-changing journey today. Just visit the link in the show notes to learn more and take the first step toward your new adventure. This week's episode is actually a pod course, which means that the information that is being presented qualifies for one continuing education contact hour. And Mustard Consulting is a NBCC approved provider. So if you like what you're hearing and you want to purchase the contact hour, head over to my website, lisamustard.com/pod courses, where you'll be able to see all of the pod course offerings plus this new one. And this one is titled When Counselor Values and Client Values don't match. And it's presented by Dr. Seth Scott, who is a professor at Columbia International University. He has been on the podcast a couple times in the past. He has another pod course that is great. You can see that one too when you head over to my website. In this episode, he is going to present 3 learning objectives. Identify the role and function of values in counseling, construct a framework for organizing and addressing personal values to avoid imposing them on clients, and third one, develop a method to recognize and explore client values in a humble and respectful way to improve client growth and goal alignment. A little bit about Dr. Scott. He joined the graduate counseling program faculty of Columbia International University in 2019 as an associate professor. He teaches primarily in the clinical counseling program in the areas of research and practice. He has multiple publications and presentations exploring issues of professional identity, as well as maintaining a private practice called Sunrise Counseling for both clinical work and supervision in the community. So once again, you all know that you can listen to the pod course content. You can get all the information, all the knowledge. And if you decide that you want the contact hour for your licensure renewal, like I said, head over to my website, lisamustard.com/pod courses, and you can purchase the pod course. And that means that you can listen to the content. You'll take a short self-study quiz. You'll complete a program evaluation or program assessment, and then you can download your certificate of completion. Any questions you have about the process and how it works, I want to encourage you to head over to that website. You can see the frequently asked questions. And one more thing, it's important to note that the information provided is solely for educational purposes and that the episodes are not meant to take the place of any work that you're doing with your therapist or doctor. So please talk to your doctor or therapist before starting anything that we might be discussing in this episode. Okay, let's dive into this training with Dr. Seth Scott. Well, hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of the show. I am excited and grateful to have Dr. Seth Scott back on the show this week. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Dr. Scott, will you share with our listeners who you are, what you do, and what you're going to talk about today?
Sure. So, yeah, I'm Seth Scott. I'm a professor of counseling at Columbia International University, and I'm also the director of our new PhD in counselor education and supervision, which is starting this fall. So, I run a counseling practice, Sunrise Counseling. I've been in South Carolina since 2019.
Nice. Well, I'm excited, like I said, and grateful to have you back. You have done another pod course with me, as well as been a guest, I know, at least one other time. Maybe this is your 3rd or 4th time appearing on the show. So I'm
Could be.
always excited to hear from you. I love learning from you. All right. So what
Yeah,
are we
thank you.
going to talk about today?
Yeah, so our plan today, the topic is when counselor values and client values don't match. And so you'll see a theme of foosball because when there's conflict, there's a match, there's two different people going at it. And so our learning outcomes for the day would be to identify the role and function of values in counseling, to be able to then construct a framework from that so that we can organize and address personal values so that we don't impose those values onto our clients, and then develop a method to recognize and explore the client values in a humble and respectful way to improve our clients' goals in growth and goal alignment. So the main concept of how I view counseling is that the purpose of counseling is to help a client identify what their goals and values are and then live in alignment with those goals and values. That's Rogers says that's the alignment of the ideal self and the real self, and that's what leads to health. And so our learning objectives will look at both how do we do that, and then how do we be aware of what our values are as the counselor so that those don't interfere with what our clients' goals are.
Okay.
Right. So to start, we have to define some terms. Right. So trying to define what we mean by personal values versus professional values. Therapist aid, the go-to for most of us, even with stacks of resources, uses a whole bunch of different tools for identifying values. And one of the ones they use defines values, personal values, as the things that we cherish most in our lives, the things that we believe are most important. Professional values, according to the ACA Code of Ethics, are these things that kind of are a living out of our ethical commitment. And the ACA proposes that our core professional values should be these 5 things of enhancing human development, honoring diversity and embracing multicultural approach in support of worth, dignity, potential, and uniqueness, promoting social justice, safeguarding the integrity of the client-counselor relationship, and then practicing in a competent and ethical manner. I will argue that, as in this little image, how we recognize the distance or the distinction between our personal and professional values is kind of the key to this. ACA argued for a while after the introduction of the new code of ethics in 2014 that one of the ways to handle disconnect between a counselor's personal values and a client's personal values is that the counselor should just bracket those values to kind of take them out of the realm of the session. What the literature demonstrates and what kind of personal experience reinforces is that you can't actually do that. Your professional values are grounded in your personal values. The reason we go into counseling is because we care about people. That's a personal value. And even the professional values of ACA here aren't actually values. I wouldn't argue that they're values. I would argue actually that they're after values, they're outcomes. And that in order to explore what our real values are, we have to go a little bit deeper. So here's an example. If we want to develop counselors of character, counselors that don't impose their values on others and are authentic, as Rogers says, we have to acknowledge that our values come from a faith or belief system. And so we may not realize what that faith or belief system is, what's feeding that value, but it doesn't start with a value. And so all counseling, all of life, there's not really any such thing as being value neutral. Um, there's always a value tension. And so even when ACA says something like we want to enhance human development through autonomy, non-malfeasance, and beneficence, those values are based in a belief system of the dignity of the individual or the autonomy of the individual. And so one of the critiques to some degree is if we aren't aware of what our faith and belief systems are, there won't be continuity in the practice of our values. And our values, personally and professionally, may conflict with one another. And so part of this recognition is if we're going to form values as counselors to make sure that we are consistent in what we do, we have to take the work and step back and say, all right, well, what informs my values? Why do I care about people? Why does the autonomy of choice for a client matter? Before we even get into what are my client's values and does it impair or conflict with what my values are? So this model kind of walks through, and we all want virtue. We want to be people of character, but unless we do the work to walk that backwards, that's not going to happen. So part of this then is we tend to acknowledge when we as counselors do work, the first thing that pops usually in the code of ethics is that we shouldn't impose our values on others. And I agree with that. I think that's a critical ethical guideline, but we can't avoid imposing our values unless we are first aware of them. And so I used to wear, when I would work outside, I'd mow the lawn, I used to wear protective glasses that were orange. And they just kept my, if rocks hit your eye, they don't break. And sometimes I would forget, I'd wear them all the time. So I'd forget that I have them on. And the orange of the glasses would distort the colors of the world around me. And so if you're looking through an orange lens, when you look at the grass, it looks really green. And at one point, I was so excited because my yard looked so nice and vibrant and green. And then I realized I had these glasses on. And when I took it off, my grass was kind of brown and dying. And until I'm aware of the fact that I have values and I'm looking through a particular lens, I'll just assume that everyone sees the world the same way that I do. And so the only way that I can avoid imposing my beliefs is if I first become aware of them. And I would argue that a lot of counselor education, because they don't explore personal values and beliefs and don't unpack what informs our values through our faith and belief systems, because we're afraid of touching it, we don't actually prepare people to prevent imposition of their values. And so, as this notes, right, people are at risk of imposing their values on the clients when your values are inconsistent with the client's goals or are discriminatory in nature. The catch is, as we know, most clients come in and their stated problem isn't their real problem. And so part of our job is to help work them towards goals that are effective and productive. And so even using terms like inconsistent or discriminatory are in and of themselves values. Those are value statements. And so when the code of ethics argues that we should avoid imposing our values, the the desire to not impose your values, attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors is in and of itself a value imposition. And so, unless we acknowledge that our system argues that everyone has the right for individual perspective and autonomy as a belief, that's where that value comes from. So, you're familiar with this picture probably. What do you see in this picture, Lisa?
At first, I see the young woman, but then once I look longer and harder, I see the older woman.
Right. All right. What about? Oh, I pulled it out. There was another one of a beach scene, but I must have removed it.
Yeah,
Um,
so we'll put that one in the show notes. I'm sorry, not in the show notes, but that will be on the handout that will
yep.
go into the portal, the learning management system. But I looked at that thing and all I could see was a beach scene. So is there something I was missing?
It's a rusty car door.
Okay.
So you might not see it because you're from the South and you might not see rusty car doors down here very often.
Right.
But yeah, this is the example of that orange lens is
Mhm.
it's really hard once you see the first thing
Right.
to change your perspective on what you're seeing.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, the other example we noted earlier is this is one of my favorite comics called Strange Planet by Nathan Pyle. And the reason I like these is because he does this work of altering our lens. And so there's these two aliens that come up to a drive-through window and they kind of go through and he has them whisper your choices to me so that I can tell them, right? And say, hello, we do not trust you, so please give us the currency first, which they agree is fair. And then they will inspect the sack because they don't trust you either.
Mhm.
And then they kind of go through and explain that they don't feel well after they eat fast food. And it's because the food is prepared fast in that process, which we all kind of we all can experience
Mhm.
and acknowledge. But yeah, having it in a different lens. There's another one with roller coasters and how they kind of think through this. And for us, frequently we don't recognize how we view the world until someone else shares a different perspective. I frequently would say that, in kindergarten, you don't realize maybe that you are poor or that you're different because your only context or environment for understanding yourself is your family system. And it's not until you get to, kindergarten or preschool that someone says like, oh, well, why are you like this? And you don't have any outside reference otherwise. And so part of our work as counselors to avoid that value clash is we have to be able to define and identify what is our worldview. James Sire did a whole bunch of work over decades to help kind of frame what worldview is. And he defines it this way. He says it's a commitment or fundamental orientation of the heart that's expressed as a story or in a set of presuppositions, which are things that we assume to be true, are partially true or entirely false, which we hold. And the catch is we sometimes hold them subconsciously or inconsistently about the basic constitution of reality that provides this foundation for how we live and move and have our being. Another way of saying this is worldviews are like sand at a picnic. It gets into everything. It's the basic lens. And until we have a contrast, we don't realize it. The catch for this is most of us will have a stated worldview. We'd say, well, I believe this about the world. I believe man is basically good and people are basically good. But then if we walk in certain areas or leave our house for the day, we lock our doors. Well, that means that our behavior, our practice doesn't actually align with our stated belief system. And Sire would argue that our real worldview is what we do and how we live it out, and not necessarily what we say we believe. So if we believe people are basically good and everyone wants what's best for one another, then we probably wouldn't lock our doors. But our experience tells us that maybe that's not true. And so our behavior demonstrates a different view of people. And so part of our work is saying which which factors are maybe inconsistent in what we say we believe versus what we actually live. And this matters for counseling because in counseling, if we say, well, people are basically good or you should be able to do whatever you want to do. There's going to be conflicts in counseling. When someone comes in and says, I should be able to do whatever I want to do, and they come in because, they've been arrested for a DUI, well, there's conflict because culture says you can't just do whatever you want to do. So have you seen any of this played out, Lisa, in your work? What worldview kind of?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of when you were talking about the setting your alarm. I mean, I truly believe that most people are good. I give them the benefit of the doubt. Like I have this, the belief that most people out there are great and are good. But what about that one time, somebody walking down your street and, sees your cars aren't there and they try to break in. So it's like, yes, we have an alarm for those one-off chances. So I think that's how I'm applying it. Yeah, my lived experiences as well as, within the therapy, walls of therapy is that is the case. Like I mean, that's how it feels for me when I hear you um describe worldview.
Yeah.
Um, you know, perceived versus like actual, real, like living it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'll ask my students, teaching at Columbia International University, most faith and belief systems would argue that prayer is important.
Hmm.
And actually, the literature demonstrates that prayer produces a means of hope, which improves your recovery rates from a variety of illnesses.
Sure. Hmm.
And so most of us would say that we believe prayer is a critical component of our faith. Um, and so that would be a worldview statement. Prayer is important. The real worldview, though, then is, well, how often do you pray when something happens?
Sure.
So your real worldview is probably, well, I have to do something about it. It's my responsibility, which doesn't align maybe with our stated worldview that we're dependent on a higher power or a higher being,
Sure.
which we pray to.
Yeah, and
So
it kind
that's Yeah,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Well, no, it's just that reminds me of, I don't even know, I'm throwing this out there, but like gratitude, you start your day off, like you will start your day better off if you stay away from, technology and social media and you focus on having gratitude and reading something that's uplifting, whatever that is,
Mhm.
working on your intentions for the day, making, like you will have a better day. You'll be in more of a positive mental state. I know those things. That I like that to be my worldview, but how often do I do that every day?
Right.
So it's a similar concept, I guess. Yeah. So this is really helpful. I like this. This is great.
So Sire, in order to be able to identify, because we need to be able to identify what our belief system is, where our worldview comes from, to then define, well, why do we value what we value, and is it consistent? He has these 7 questions, and really they're applicable for any worldview position, any belief system. Every belief system has some explanation for what is really real. How do we determine what is really real? You might believe, like Descartes, that because we think we are. You might think like Neo in the Matrix that it's not real, but you have some explanation for this, and then it kind of walks down. So how do we determine what is real around us? How do we define what a human being is? And again, you can see even as we look at some of these pieces, the real world implications then of how we respond to these questions, both for life and for counseling.
Mhm.
So how we define what a human is and how we define what happens after death defines somewhat how we choose to interact with people and what our beliefs then determine in our values. So when you believe or what you believe about when someone becomes a human or what a human is, then will inform your view on things like abortion or euthanasia or end of life care. And so we all have stated values about them. The question is it consistent with an established belief system that we hold, and being able to unpack that? And frequently, for us as counselors, when there's tension in values in session, it's because it's down the road from these answers, and we aren't necessarily aware of what we actually believe about this thing. We just have a statement or position on what the end result is. I don't think this should happen, or I want this to happen. And so until we unpack what comes before that, we can't clearly articulate our position. So part of what we can do as counselors is, and this is nice because it's duplicated in what we do with clients. Most of the work that we do as counselors for our own lives are things that we expect our clients to do. We just tend to be really bad at it too. Even like you said, like I tell my clients all the time, don't charge your phone near where you sleep. Don't look at your devices. But again, it's as you said, but we want to increase our self-awareness. And so we can do things like some of these therapist aid worksheets. They have value discussion cards and breaks out like, all right, well, what do you value? Asking different prompts to explore some of those different pieces. There's some discussion questions that they provide, which are helpful examples. I can show you one and see if it still pulls up. Do you still see it?
I see it.
Okay. So things like this, and these actually make for great. I went through with my family at the dinner table. So things like values tend to change as we pass through different life stages. The things we value as a teenager are different as a parent. So thinking back through how your values changed and kind of doing some of that work. This works great with clients, but it also works great as a counselor to kind of unpack what that looks like. So those are just some examples of the work that we need to do as counselors to make sure that we are aware of what's contributing. Another example from Wagner and Phipps is asking these three questions of yourself. So what groups of causes light me up or excite me? What injustices make me want to run to battle? What it kind of ignites my passion? And then if I could only choose one area to make a difference, what would it be? And those kind of end result virtue responses help to reveal for us, well, what do we value? One of the, most of us, Jonathan Haidt in his book, The Righteous Mind, unpacks the different flavors of virtue that we hold. And we have 6 flavors, and how often we use the same terminology like justice. We value justice, but we might not define that justice in the same way. And so part of it is kind of unpacking and recognizing, all right, well, what do I value? Where do those values come from? How universal are those values? Is the issue that I'm working with somebody, is it because we are saying the same thing but saying it in a different way? Or do we actually have conflicting values? So if I said to you, Lisa, well, I think you should have the right to live the way that you want to live. Most of the time, that's fine, unless how you want to live imposes on how I want to live.
Mm-hmm.
So I could say you can live however you want, but if you want to live in my house, well, that might be a problem for me. And I think that's part of what we're seeing as an increase in value conflicts in the world around us is in previous generations in the Western world, most people had similar practices of values, what we would call a Judeo-Christian ethic. Most people kind of had a cooperative values, and there was always going to be a minority of people that held differing values. But when it's a minority, we can make exceptions for that. If one person jaywalks, cars can slow and allow for that. If everyone jaywalks, no one can drive. And so that's some of where we're at today is the number of people in their values and how that impacts. And so the next question then for counseling, because that's our focus, is how does our belief, our worldview system, impact our values and define mental health? I would argue that when even saying something like mental health, which is what we as counselors promote, versus mental illness, we don't just treat mental illness. We want to promote mental health, which is this broader, more robust concept of wellness, lifestyle development, holistic care across the lifespan. That's a value, right? That's a worldview piece. And so even as a counselor, what we mean by what we do is a worldview statement. So how would you define mental health, Lisa?
How would I define mental health? Well, I like to think of it as being self-aware and introspective on how our thoughts, feelings, and actions are, playing out in our lives. I mean, and that's how I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you incorporated that cognitive behavioral triangle in
Mm-hmm.
there. right?
Yeah.
Which, yeah, they all have to kind of work in conjunction with each other
Hmm.
for healthy functioning. And I think for most of us, even in the examples we've already said, we tend to be in constant flux in an attempt to keep those things in balance.
Hmm.
Um, so our thinking might get irrational someday, but it doesn't affect our behavior because we're in habit.
Right.
Um, but if our behaviors get too out of whack, then it will affect how we feel in our thinking. So all of us, I think, there isn't necessarily the ideal of saying this is what I've achieved mental health. It's we're all in the process of working towards mental health,
Hmm.
which kind of gives hope for all of us, I think.
Right. I just have to go back to having that awareness of, I mean, I think I was just having this conversation with our daughter last night, who is taking psychology this year in 10th grade at her high school. And she thinks since I'm a therapist, I can help her with all her homework. But it was asking about introspection and self-awareness. And I told her, I said, that's to me the most important thing. If you can pay attention to what's going on internally and you can make sense of it or be curious about it, that's half of it right there, is
Right.
being just aware of what's going on internally. So I think that's really important, you
Yeah,
know.
that's good. Well, and then you're less affected
Yeah,
potentially by what's going on outside of you
right.
because you feel the transition and adjustment. So when I did in-home therapy in Boston for years,
Mhm.
I would work with parents and I dealt with a lot of conduct issues. And parents would say, my kid just goes from 0 to 10.
Mhm.
Like we can't intervene. They go from fine to explosion. Um, and I would kind of reply back, they don't. Everyone goes through all of those numbers. It's just how aware you are of that progression to be able to intervene. You can't
Right.
intervene at 8, 9, or 10. You have to intervene at 4, 5, and 6.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
It's
but
tough.
it's that internal awareness, which is so critical.
Yeah.
So I would argue that the role of our worldview, which then informs our values, is critical because it defines all of what we do in counseling.
Mhm.
And a lot of this operates outside of conscious awareness. Every theory has a worldview lens for it. And so this is part of why we agree or disagree with certain theorists. So guys like Sigmund Freud, developing a theory at the turn of the 20th century in Vienna, in an overly sexualized culture, created a kind of sex as a key theme for his lens, whereas someone like Alfred Adler, growing up in a family as a middle child, has a different perspective and created a different sibling relationship lens
Mhm.
because of his experience and his worldview. Carl Rogers, growing up in the 30s and 40s, or developing his theory in the 30s and 40s from a fundamentalist Midwestern American context, had a different lens. And
Yeah.
so it's recognizing that how we view the world informs what we think about what will work and why we think there's a problem and what we think the solution will be.
Mhm.
And so all of this kind of boils down to this bottom level worldview issue or belief issue of what is the meaning of life. And so your belief system will say, well, what are we here for? How did we get here? And then the values tied to that define how we walk that out.
Mm.
And so in counseling, it's important for us as counselors to know how we respond to that question, and what the implications of that question are, so that when we're working with clients, when they're struggling with that question, we don't just assume that our answer will provide an answer for them. But if there's a struggle, it's probably because they aren't aware of what their belief system says about what that answer is, or they don't like what their belief system says about what that answer is. And so our job is not necessarily to say, well, this is what my belief system says the answer is. Our job is to explore what their belief system is and whether that fulfills their questions and goals, and just explore it. We're walking alongside them to explore it. Um, and so in doing this, we kind of identify what will work for us and what won't. Some of the techniques from some of the theories, I probably won't use because they don't align with how I view the world. Or, I mean, you look at any of those early theorists, and most of them slept with their clients. So we don't do that anymore, because we would say that's not in the best interest of the client. but that worldview kind of fed a different lens or a different perspective. And so we see this even when we define treatment. We would argue that therapy is this systematic process, and most definitions of therapy have these components, which is a client, a sufferer, a healer, and contacts. And you'll see actually each of these concepts are worldview values. So how we define what a sufferer is, how we define relief, how we define a healer, expertise, and suffering, context, and change are all value laden worldview terms. Mm. So we can produce change, but how we define whether it's change or not, and whether it's appropriate change in the right direction, that's all value language. So for us, it's important to recognize we should not impose our values, but if we have a client coming to us seeking relief, those are all value laden concepts. And so we need to define, well, how do you define yourself as a sufferer? What does relief look like for you? You're perceiving me as trained in expertise to help you. How does that work for you? And how often do you want to meet? What is frequently enough? So for some of our clients, they view therapy like Woody Allen, where 3 times a week is, appropriate. Some are every other week. Those are all value concepts, and you're balancing the value of your money and your time with the value of what you think it'll take to get well. And all of us are that way. If counseling was guaranteed to work in 10 sessions and was free, then more people would probably do it. But because we're balancing the work involved, the time involved, and the money involved, all of us are making kind of realistic priority evaluations based on what we value more. And we see with most people, they undervalue their own health and value their capacity to contribute to others, which is what leads to a lot of mental illness, is they're ignoring the balance of their own needs for the sake of trying to help other people, but then they're giving out of their lack. Mm-hmm. And so part of our work is to identify what those things are and supporting client values. And so in order to prevent the imposition of values or the conflict of values, we have to identify what our client values are. And as we noted, they might not be able to clearly state them. They might be unconscious or subconscious. And we tend not to know what our values are until there is a conflict. So it's right. Like, oh, I don't care where we eat. We can eat wherever you want. It's like, all right, let's go get pizza. I don't want pizza. It's like, that's all of a sudden we realize once there's an option provided that we disagree with it. We have some conflict. And so for us as the counselor, we want to support client values to help identify them. And we can kind of do that through that same process that we did for ourselves, exploring what your values are, what your belief system is. But we would argue that your values are evidenced by what you view as a problem, because it's interfering with what you think matters to you. It's identified or evidenced through your goals, and then it's also evidenced in your time and money. What you value can be defined by where your money goes and where your time goes. Tied to this, frequently the ACA Code of Ethics would want us to kind of affirm client autonomy and capacity. In counseling, we tend to only affirm these two things. We affirm that the client has the capacity for change and that they have the responsibility for that change as an individual. My belief system would say, as someone made in the image of God, they have inherent dignity, worth, and value. So that belief system then informs my value of that person, which then allows me to work with them regardless of what their problem is, because I believe that they were created for purpose, with dignity, with inherent value. And so some other worldview belief systems might not have the same capacity to promote autonomy or responsibility based on what their belief about where we come from is, which is somewhat ironic to me. Right? So if our worldview belief system argues that we're just kind of happenstance or chance, and that I could have been here or not be here, then what happens from that has different implications then for the value of the person. And so that's kind of a recognition of how our belief system informs even our ability to affirm the values of a client,
Right. Right.
and why that person matters. So we do that, but we wouldn't affirm someone's behaviors or choices, right?
Mhm.
We don't really do that in counseling. And so that's kind of a stated difference. And then we want to define with the client what is their stated value and what is their lived value. That same example of worldview of
Mhm.
what do you think about prayer and how do you pray? Um, what do you think matters in life? You love your children. How much time and money are you devoting to your children? Or you're spending 10 times more at work than you are at home, then your values are in conflict. Evaluating their alignment. And then part of counseling, the main piece in creating a treatment goal is we need to create steps that will match the values and practice of the client. We're walking out. If you say you value this, this is where the problem lies. And as you noted before, self awareness with your daughter, introspection. The key goal of all counseling is to expand our open self, right? To reduce what is unknown, um, and to some degree reduce what is hidden so that we can be people of character, we can be transparent, and it doesn't mean we have to share everything about ourselves to everyone, um, but you don't have to live this kind of secret and hidden life in what we do. So the bigger question I think that we want to explore in the few minutes we have remaining is this: like, how do we then in counseling deal with value conflicts? Like, what do we do when my worldview and my beliefs as a counselor are different than yours as the client? Because practically, as the counselor, I'm in the power position. The client is in need. The client is coming to me for perspective. I can very easily just say, well, if you do this, this, and this, everything will be better. One of the reasons we don't do that in counseling is people tend not to follow advice anyway.
Right.
Uh, um, and we can all know the right thing to do and struggle to do it. And so part of what we as counselors, the first step, um, is to be a counselor with humility, to have cultural humility, and to increase our own self-awareness. And so part of this is this ability to not need to defend what we believe. And I think the code of ethics is correct in the way that we do that is we're aware of it. And so if I'm aware that there's a conflict in what you believe and what I believe, then I don't need to defend my belief. I just need to explore where you get your belief from. For most of us, the conflict comes when people are closest to what we believe but have a slight difference. So for most counselors, I can work with somebody who believes something completely different from me, um, and has completely different value system because I'm aware of it coming in. I know, like, oh, we don't agree on this, like that's okay. Most of the time, value impositions occur when we're tracking with a client and we feel the same, and then all of a sudden there's some shift, there's some little difference. And the reason that we struggle with that, I think, is because, like any good TV show, the reason that we panic when when the person runs like up the stairs into the house when the person is chasing them instead of like away from the house is because we put ourselves in their shoes. We become the character.
Mhm.
And so our mirror neurons are activated and we're experiencing the same heightened response as the person in the TV show or movie. That happens with our clients as well. So we're walking along, experiencing with them. And if they say something that conflicts with our values or world belief, we feel like they're challenging that we don't align with our worldview beliefs. We take it personally. And so if we can disconnect from that and have great awareness, then we don't have to take it personally. You could say to me, I drive a Subaru Forester, and you could say, I think Subarus are the stupidest cars out there. It's like, I don't care. Like, I don't care. I don't care what you think about it. Like, big deal, right? Um, but if you said, like, well, I'm going to take your car because no one should drive these, then that might be a problem for me.
Right.
But if I'm aware of what I think and believe about the car that I drive, it doesn't matter whether you conflict with me.
Yeah.
Um,
I had a feeling that happened to me last week. I was watching a training and I was like right there with her. I was like, we are just I totally get this person, what they're saying. And then she made one comment and I was like, oh, that's so different than what I believe. Like, and I realized like I found myself, okay, I'm tuning this out. But then I thought, wait a minute, Lisa, that's one thing. Like, be curious about that. And she's a human and she's beautiful and she's sharing her gift. And here
Mhm.
I am wanting to explain to her why that is wrong. And I was like, wait, this isn't okay. So
Right.
it was a good teaching moment for me to kind of like remember my value of that she is by being here. She's inherently has a reason for being here and I love her. And it's like, whoa.
Mhm.
It really caught me off guard, but this is exactly what that felt like. And I'm sure people listening, watching can really relate to that because it happens, right?
Yep.
That's a
Yep.
lot.
Yeah, so I mean, there's that example that, the one that comes up frequently for our students that we explore, are issues, in the world has changed rapidly in counseling the past 5 years around issues of gender,
Yes.
sexuality,
Mhm.
and what is the new norm is really, really new. I just submitted something. What did I just do? I was completing a form, for an insurance form for somebody through Blue Cross Blue Shield. And even in the drop down menu of Blue Cross Blue Shield, there's only male, female options,
Mhm.
right? And we're trying to catch up as a culture and society to something that is really recent. And so for a lot of our students, there is the fear, if not the actual experience of a value clash around issues of gender, of sexuality. And I speak quite a bit. I work with families around issues of gender. How do we address differences in belief and perspective? And for some people, um, if you believe that God made you a particular way, then a discounting of that belief could have eternal implications for people within that belief system, which that's why it's such
Right.
a tense discussion.
Right.
Um, and so as I work with my students, part of it is saying, um, if you are aware of what you believe and what you believe is true, then someone who disagrees with that belief doesn't necessarily have to disagree with the truth. It's just that their values and experience of that is different from yours, and your job is not to make them believe what you believe,
Right.
but to make them aware of what they believe and evaluate whether it's consistent or not.
Right.
Um,
For them.
because for
For
them,
them. Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And most of what most of us believe has holes, has inconsistencies. And it's those inconsistencies in our life and practice that tend to cause the problems that present in counseling.
Right. Right.
And so I feel anxious because maybe I don't accept myself the way that I want, or other people don't. And so I want other people to accept me. But if I experience anxiety because I can't accept myself, until I accept myself, no, why would I expect anyone else to accept me?
Right.
And and so part of our work is saying, all right, just because I believe something, just because I hold these values doesn't mean that you need to hold my values. However, um, as counselors, the more aware we are and the more consistent we are, the healthier we will be as well. And so it could be that the steps that we took to get healthy could be followed. There are degrees of alignment in our beliefs and our values that are more consistent than others. And so
True.
as we work with clients, we want them to be able to follow to some degree the things that we've experienced that are healthy and good.
Yeah.
Um, and we don't really, in the field of counseling, have a problem imposing values around some things.
Mhm.
Like, all right, well, although actually this is changing too, but diet, exercise, nutrition, we'd say like, you probably shouldn't pound that family size pack of Oreos right before bed. That's going to impact you. Here's lots of literature to support that. We probably, although that's a value imposition, it's one that most of us would kind of hold and agree to. And then we can point out to a client that says, I value my sleep and I value my health, to say, well, your choice in doing that thing is in conflict with what you value. Um, and so you value feeling good and
Mhm.
immediate gratification, but those are going to be at conflict with each other. And so, really, our job is to kind of hold up values.
Mhm.
Um, And culture of humility is a great way to do that because, like Columbo, which is a dated reference, I know, but it is this curiosity, like you noted, right? Columbo would come back in and just kind of ask this question of like, huh, I wonder if this is going on. And almost always as an investigator, as a detective, he was like pointing right at the heart of what the problem was.
Mhm.
Um, and as counselors, being curious allows our clients to be curious about their own experience as well,
Yeah.
and explore the conflict. So when we have conflict, though, there's going to be conflict.
Mhm.
All of us, I have conflict with my own value stance and belief system internally. And so I like Remley and Herlihy's model of ethical decision making. So we identify and define the problem. We involve the client in trying to decide how do we resolve this. We'll look at what the codes are, look at the principles and virtues, be aware of how we feel about it so that not that our feelings are going to drive it, but that they don't interfere. So we pay attention to our feelings so that they aren't interfering with our decision making. Talk to colleagues and experts, look at the cultural context, the time context, look at what we hope to achieve, and then pick something. Right? That's how we make any ethical decision. However, I add, Dr. Nana, my colleague, adds, she teaches the ethics class, that in any ethical decision making model, once we choose and act on our choice, we have to be prepared to take responsibility for the consequences. Because sometimes, uh, regardless of the choice we make, there's always going to be consequences, but they may not be good consequences. Um, but in a lot of decisions we make in counseling, it's kind of a lose lose. And so, there's going to be times where you either, like even like a classic one of whether you break confidentiality. Well, there's consequences. If you break confidentiality, they could sue you. If you don't break confidentiality and they hurt themselves, they could sue you. Um, and so we make a choice based on this process, on this model, on what values we hold for the is the confidentiality of the client a greater value or virtue than their life and safety? I would say no. And the code of ethics would say no. So we'd say no, they're protecting their life is more important than protecting their confidence. And so we will break their confidence to protect their life. But that might mean that they don't come see you again, that they get upset with you. So in any value conflict, we're going to walk through a process. But the goal really is to apply this humility lens. And as Hook notes in his book on he's one of the authors in his book on culture of humility, it is these four pieces of kind of knowledge, structure, motivation, relationships, and cognition. And it's this bigger piece of saying, who am I in context of others? Um, and the reason that we want to be humble is because we want to be counselors of character and virtue, which is the end result of our belief system, our values, our telos, our purpose to produce virtue. And so that looks like this and how we talk about this. In counseling, we have lots of academic standards, right? For KCREP programs, we have 8 core standards. We can test you on for the licensure exam whether you know the Erickson stages of socio-emotional development. But like you noted with your daughter, there's also lots of non-academic dispositional standards that make for an effective counselor. We want someone who's trustworthy, who's self-aware, who's open to learning, um, and and we've struggled as a discipline to define and measure those non-academic dispositions, those character traits. And I would argue the reason that we've struggled is because we have them as virtues and values, but we haven't agreed to what our faith and belief system is that produce those values and virtues. Um, and so, from a faith based grad program at CIU, I'm working with other programs around the country. There's a little over 100 currently KCREP accredited faith based grad counseling programs to see if we can create consistency in virtue standards from a faith-based lens, because our faith and belief system would be similar, so that we can create a comparable virtue model of character development. Because as this slide notes, if we want blank virtue in counselors, right? If we want ethical virtues or consistent and loving counselors, that comes from somewhere.
Mhm.
So what does love mean? What does it mean to be loving? Well,
Mhm.
as a parent, we know that love isn't always just affirming and accepting what our children want. Sometimes it's doing the hard things of saying like, no, you can't have that extra brownie. No, you do need to go to bed.
Mhm.
Um, and that is love. And so in counseling, what does that look like? And we recognize that the reason this is so important and the reason your pod courses are so important is our character as people, as counselors, is informed and formed by our community.
Mhm.
So part of what we say we value is defined by either inside or outside of our awareness, who we say we are. Say, oh, I'm this type of person. And usually those messages come from our family of origin, they come from the community we grow up in. And so some of the hard work of working with our clients and working in our own self-awareness is identifying what those what those belief systems are to define and determine our values. And if we can do that, then there won't be this concern about conflict, right? So this is just the example of some of the character virtues that we're working on developing of things like faith, hope, love, wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage. And I argue in this complicated table that this is a good summary of virtues based on the existing literature. So Cervic has their own framework from ACA. Spurgeon did research in 2012 on character traits. Peterson and Seligman in positive psychology have what their virtues are. And I would argue that these character virtues actually, which go back to early Christian writers, but also just kind of basic character traits that we all would pursue, provide somewhat of a framework for what the outcome should be if we are people of belief and value, right? So if as counselors we have a perspective of justice, that means that we work with clients with respect and openness. And so sort of that is kind of walking that out. So what do we do when specifically when they clash? I would argue that as counselors, we have to be aware of what our values and beliefs are and why there's a conflict. Even as you noted, if you're getting too close, that's usually when a conflict will arise. And then determine whether a personal value is driving the issue with the client or there's a particular need to intervene for the client. Assess whether we are living in alignment with our own stated worldview beliefs and values, because we might say we value something, but we might not be living in consistency with that. And then identify it, work with the client to identify theirs, decide whether a value and position is in the best interest of a client. This is that ethical decision making process. There's going to be times when we do impose our values, like around safety issues. So the client might want to die, and we would say, no, I think that my value of keeping you alive is more important than your value. So we do impose our values, and then because of that, we accept the potential consequences. So that's our job. And then the client will have to identify what issue is in conflict, where their source of this value and belief system come from, whether they're living in alignment with that practice, and then whether they agree with our value or not to choose it or to let it go. Right. We have no capacity really to keep clients alive, as an example, or to align with our values. They can really do whatever they want. And so our responsibility is just to help them see where that alignment is and what their values are, and give them steps and tools to walk out a better alignment with their stated beliefs and their values. And then these are some references for resources.
Great. Okay. So this has just been fabulous. I don't have questions. Usually I have some questions for you, but I'm just kind of taking this all in. And I know I'm going to go back and listen to this episode. I mean, every time I listen to an episode with you, I get something new out of it. So I know the next time I listen, I might have a question. If any of our listeners do have questions for you or they want to learn more, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, they can reach out to me. Probably the best is my CIU email,
Mhm.
which is seth.scott@ciu.edu,
Okay.
seth.scott@ciu.edu. Yeah, if you're interested in our PhD program, as most of our listeners are probably licensed counselors, We do have a PhD in counselor education supervision that you can also get more information on.
Oh, I didn't realize that. And it's online, right? Aren't they all?
It's online. It has 2 in-person residencies in
Yeah.
May that are 5 days each, where you get experience teaching in person
Hmm.
and practicing skills. But yeah, all of the course content, 60 credits is available online, and it's competitively priced with other programs.
Yes, and I learned so much from you and from your colleagues over at CIU. I'm grateful for you being so close and within the back pocket of Columbia for me. So thank you again for being here.
Yeah.
And once again, we'll put links in the show notes for you guys to connect with Dr. Scott. If you do want to purchase the pod course, just head over to the website lisamustard.com/pod courses, where you can purchase this one individually or you can purchase it as part of a bundle. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been awesome.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Please note that the therapy show with Lisa Mustard is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and not a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice. Always consult with your therapist, doctor, or physician before implementing any suggestions from the show. The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard is edited and engineered by Chelsea Weaver. If you're looking to start a podcast or ready to take the editing off of your plate, be sure to visit chelseaweaverpodcasting.com. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine. Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover all the pod courses and other continuing education offerings. And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.